Hello everyone! If you're a fellow film photographer or just a curious person looking for your first compact and point-and-shoot camera without compromising picture quality, you've likely found yourself in a pretty tough situation. Old and previously cheap cameras like this Nikon AF35 AF or original Olympus Mju have dramatically increased to unreasonable prices, and options like Yashica T4 or T5 now cost around 500. And don't even ask me about compacts like Contax T2 or T3. They now cost more than $1,000 or $2,000. Yeah, so you all probably heard the huge news for film photography community. Pentax has just released their new Pentax 17 half-frame camera, and Mint is on their finish line to release their Rollei 35 AF camera. I suppose that for some of you this might mean a huge relief, but not for me. Don't get me wrong, these are two impressively great modern cameras that could produce amazing results. But usability-wise and functionality-wise, I don't find them designed for photography enthusiasts who appreciate both ease of use and set of advanced controls, which are carefully designed for various conditions, from run and gun type of photography to cautiously planned scenes. And then I thought, like, okay, Victor, if you don't like these two, what would be a perfect point-and-shoot camera for you? So, please join me in the discovery process of designing a perfect-and-shoot camera suitable for all photography levels, from novices to professionals, and which will be designed to use in all possible shooting situations. So, let's go! I also borrowed several cameras from my friends to practically demonstrate what I mean throughout the video. Before we start, let me quickly describe my thinking process. First of all, I'm gonna list down all functionalities for a beefy camera. Then I would like to strip down all of this to only important features, which then MVP version of such a camera should have. And remaining list of features could be used then for V2 or for more expensive and advanced model. Let's start with the lens. It should be something between 35 and 40 mm f2.8. If you ask me to imagine something far-fetched, I'd like to see a dual lens design that allows for both 28 and 40 mm 2.8 options in the same lens. Okay, so it should have an autofocus with distance indication. It should also have manual focus with distance indication and have a filter thread to mount filters, like an orange one for black and white photography. Ideally, it should have a separate leaf shutter and aperture, like in Contax T2 or Olympus XA, but of course it should be fully automated. Then we have a light meter, TTL, or at least a sensor mounted on the lens to allow accurate metering with filters without extra EV compensation calculations in your head. Spot, center weighted and average meter modes, exposure compensation of ±2 stops. In terms of basic features, I believe that for such a camera, a film advancing lever is the must. Then goes regular stuff, like frame counter, on-off switch, shutter button with a thread for shutter release cable, and half-press locks focus and exposure. ISO selector. By default, the camera should support DX coding, but if you'd like to push-pull your film, no problem, we got it covered. Film rewind lever, self-timer button, multiple exposures button, maybe somewhere on the bottom plate to declutter controls on the top. Then tripod mount nearby and low battery warning indicator LED. Now let's talk about the coolest parts, controlling camera modes and the lens focusing ring. Since this is a perfect camera designed for all photographers from beginners to professionals and to be used in various situations, it should have both program auto exposure mode and autofocus on dedicated dials. What's next? Let's focus on the focus dial. No matter how advanced an autofocus module is, I still need an infinity mode where I can be 100% sure my landscape photos will be sharp, so I can free my mind from checking if my camera caught focus or not. This is especially useful for backlit scenes or night photography where autofocus might struggle, or when I'm shooting on the go and, like waiting for lens to autofocus could completely ruin the shot. Okay, why did I mark 3 meters in red? Bear with me for a second, I'll explain. For enthusiasts and professionals, there should be definitely a way to manually set aperture values. So now you probably realize the connection between f5.6 and 3 meters. For example, on Olympus XA, if you set your aperture to 5.6 and pre-focus on 3 meters, everything further away will be sharp. This is perfect for street photographers who don't want to be bothered by the speed of accuracy of autofocus or depth of field considerations. Yes, I understand that final values will depend on the lens designs, and I'm here not an expert at all. But let's leave it as is for now. On the back side for the thumb, there is an auto exposure lock button. So if you are shooting in complex lighting conditions, point the camera at a medium gray object, press the button, compose the image to your liking, and pull the trigger. Oh, and I almost forgot about the flash. I don't use it much, to be honest, but on almost all point-and-shoots from the 80s or 90s, the flash is enabled by default. This is a nightmare. First, it drains your battery every time you turn the camera on, because it needs to charge the capacitor. The capacitor can't hold the charge for long, so it discharges in some time, and it means that you're draining your battery for nothing. What's even more annoying is that you can't use your camera until the capacitor is fully charged. And to make it even worse, every time you turn your camera off and back on, any setting to disable the flash gets reset. And that's why I suggest to move a force flash setting somewhere else. When you will attempt to shoot in low light condition, you will definitely see a blinking flash icon inside your viewfinder, so you will force enable the flash. And speaking of the viewfinder, it should be big and bright like in the Contax T2. This is one of the main reasons I prefer the T2 over T3, because the latter has a smaller viewfinder which is not as enjoyable to use. Remember, we're designing a camera for a pleasure, so we can allow ourselves whatever we want. Next, what I really like about the Olympus XA is being able to see the chosen shutter speed. This way I know that I need to be extra still if I have 1/30th of a second exposure, for example. On the left side we should have a flash icon indicating it's wise to use flash, and the plus-minus icon for exposure compensation. Probably up and down and dot icons indicating focus status. Additionally, I'd like to see the distance the camera thinks it's focused on. This is a major flaw of the Contax T2. It shows a green dot indicating focus, but sometimes developed photos reveal they're out of focus. Because if you saw in the viewfinder that the chosen distance was 10 meters instead of 1 meter, you could easily refocus. So I'd like to have an indication of focusing distance to be 200% sure before pressing the shutter button. Then of course you'd also have frame lines and smaller frame lines to account for parallax during close focusing. And there you have it, the perfect point-and-shoot camera. If you're a beginner, set everything to green and you're good to go. In low light, the viewfinder icon will tell you to enable flash if needed. For street photography or shooting from the hip, set your focus to 3 meters and aperture to at least 5.6. And you're good to go, super fast, silent and reliable. For landscapes or cityscapes in low light where you don't want to rely on autofocus, set your dial to infinity. Voila! Also, no more autofocus images due to failed AF sensor reading, because you can now see precisely where the camera locked focus. If you find it suspicious, you can just immediately refocus. Want to override DX coding and push your favorite Ilford HP5 2-stops? Or you hands-pull your film, put it into canisters without DX coding? Just use the ISO dial. What do you think? For me, it's no gimmicks, no cognitive overload whatsoever. Everything has its own place and it's easy to use, from fully automated to fully controlled. I specifically didn't include the shutter speed dial because the camera has a spotlight meter, and if needed you could just find a spot in the frame which match to your external meter readings if you use one, and then lock it using auto exposure lock button. For nighttime photography on a tripod, the camera supports bulb mode with the same implementation as in the Contax T2. And just imagine this non-existent 28 to 40mm dual lens design. I would immediately pay $1,000 for it, no questions asked. However, this could be a very expensive camera to design, considering the mechanical parts and switches. Back in the day, these were standard, but now we have digital controllers and buttons and all of this, making it much easier to replace old-school dials with modern rotary controls and LED displays. Let's try to trim down some functionality to decrease mechanical engineering costs and overall camera cost, leaving only necessary parts. Let's assume the core module of the camera will be something like ESP32 controller. To reduce costs, we should ditch the autofocus motor and make the lens focusing fully manual. but still have focus confirmation capabilities in the form of simple LEDs on the right side of the viewfinder. We'd also stripped down the advanced viewfinder and replaced with a simple OLED display on top to show all of the info previously available inside the viewfinder, similar to basic light meters like these ones. These three LEDs for focus confirmation could be reused for exposure metering information. For example, when you have pressed the shutter button, they would behave for exposure confirmation, similar to simple light meters in old SLRs. We would need a button for the self-timer and ISO override. To override the DX setting and cycle through to set ISO, it will work after 3 seconds long press to avoid accidental activation in your pocket. Then we would need controls for EV compensation using a simple rotary switch, maybe an extra LED for the flash, something like that. Then we could move the film rewind lever to the bottom, similar to Kodak Rito Ektar H35N. For camera mode controls and aperture settings, we'd use a similar or more advanced rotary switch with LEDs like this one. We could even ditch the EV compensation dial and ISO selector button, since this rotary switch supports 3 modes by tapping on top of it. I mean, after one tap, you can control EV compensation, and to apply it, just half press the shutter button, and rotary control will reset its states to camera mode selector, or just tap it again. For example, the second tap will enable DX override and then switch back to camera modes. And of course, everything will be reflected on the display. And last but not least, a simple on-off button. The camera would go to a standby mode in 30 seconds of inactivity, half press on the shutter button to turn it back, or use the on-off switch again. In total, we have sleek and basic camera body with manual film advance and rewind levers, with DX code reader and ability to override it, potentially gorgeous lens plus shutter module with focus and position feedback using modern rangefinders. To be honest, I have no idea how hard to produce it nowadays, but it's definitely possible. Has flash, which is disabled by default, and consists from basic electronic parts. ESP32 or similar, rotary switch, 2 buttons, on-off button, OLED display, battery compartment for CR123, or maybe even we could use a battery with ability to charge it from USB-C. That's it. That's it. As simple as that. Even the stripped down version is a monster of a camera. Small, light, with an amazing lens. 99% of the focus will be sharp, using standard program mode, which will choose narrower aperture values to increase depth of field and compensate for possible misfocus. You need extra control over exposure? Here you go. And so on and so forth. So you got the idea. And such a camera could be easily designed by a team of 2-3 people using existing components on the market, maybe plus custom PCB to make it compact and tailored to the final camera body layout. It's hard to tell approximate price, but it would be minimum 500 euros plus 25% tax, since manufacturing and parts like rangefinder, lens plus shutter mechanism, they definitely expensive in low volumes. And of course, I'm not even talking about R&D costs. But as I mentioned before, let's assume that it will be done as a side gig, probably by a small team of highly motivated individuals. And my question is, why it's so hard for dedicated full-time professionals to design such a simple and powerful camera? And instead now we have this gimmicky half-frame Pentax 17 with all of these dials and controls overload. I don't know. Rollei 35 AF is much better and similar to what I shown before, but I don't dig this nostalgia for rotating wheels in the front and possibly lack of focus distance confirmation and lack of simple and very powerful just focus on infinity option, so you can avoid possible misfocus and hunting using this LiDAR sensor. Otherwise it's pretty good and promising. Maybe I will even have one. Anyway, what I mean is that in terms of mechanical parts, we already have amazing and cheap reusable 50-60 euro cameras like the Kodak Rito Ektar H35N, which already have everything you need for film loading and advancing. Also, it has a flash and a capacitor for it inside. Replace the lens with a shutter mechanism and then add on top an ESP32 light intensity sensor, rangefinder, rotary dials, 3 buttons, and OLED display, and you're done. Probably the most expensive part would be the lens and shutter, so I have no idea how much it could cost. But looking at Loma LC cameras under $4,500 plus tax, it's definitely possible. I mean, just imagine this electrified Loma LC camera. It would be super cool. So yeah, that's my take on situation. Some of you might think I'm a piece of a dumb talking head, which is not far from truth. So let's continue the discussion in the comments. Or maybe you're a mechanical engineer or know how to make lens and shutter mechanism. Let me know. I can code firmware, or I can find someone who could do this better than me, and also I can do UX and possible UI. Let's do proof of concept based on some existing reusable camera, for example. Why not? That's it for today. See you next time. Bye.